the most intense, I repeat, the most intense Bitcoin banking shakeup in the USA. The CEO of Bank of America, the second largest bank in the world, is saying right now in a live interview that they are going to heavily invest in Bitcoin as soon as there's regulatory clarity. Check this out, the biggest bank is now getting into Bitcoin, and the CEO is speaking very, very positively. Bank of America has also confirmed a market capitalization of $350 billion. Ray Dalio, perhaps the most famous hedge fund manager in the world, is also on TV, saying that Bitcoin has qualities that make it a legitimate asset, and is giving Bitcoin his stamp of approval. Big banks and hedge fund managers are major drivers of Bitcoin adoption, more so than individual small investors. Then those are way, way bigger drivers. Bitcoin adoption drivers, like if Uva from next door just buys in for $10 at 21. Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, that's nice of course. But the big players, those are really the big levers we have. And the craziest part is that Trump is currently working on the regulation here. At the bank, there could even be executive orders coming out here. Maybe the executive order has already been released when the video goes online. And then Bank of America is going to dive massively into Bitcoin. It's a tremor that you can hardly imagine. And this will definitely drive Bitcoin to new all-time highs. Or it could definitely be a really huge driver of adoption here. Because for the last 4 years, the banks could do relatively little. Because the Biden administration has blocked it. Because there isn't a good bank here. Keyword ZEP 1.2.1 regulation. And this could now be flipped with Donald Trump. And then we have maybe the craziest catalyst here, because Michael Saylor said it too. It takes 3 mega catalysts to shoot Bitcoin up to several million. First, the Bitcoin ETF, second, fair value accounting, and the third is the bank. And soak that in. What the CEO of Bank of America is saying about Bitcoin. I can hardly believe that we're seeing this live right now. How the game theory of Bitcoin is fully playing out here. And of course, we'll also take a look at Ray Dalio's statements later. That's obviously mind-blowing here.
Let me ask you a different question now, and Becky has one back in Washington, but it's about crypto. We just had Brian Armstrong sitting in. We're in, and there's definitely a lot of excitement about crypto. The banking business, for the most part, has stayed away from crypto, given the risks. So, first, ask, because fully in the crypto growth year, 12 months as well.
First, he asks, the reporter, how does it look? Could you imagine going all in on Bitcoin, diving into crypto? So not just dipping your toes in, but going all in. If the regulation improves a bit here. And now, pay attention, take in the answer here.
I separate out this kind of risk. Crypto versus stable assets and the digital movement of money. Because we already move the vast majority of our money digitally. Our consumers do, our companies do. And so the question is, what's the business practice that you need to have to move another type of currency? Practice that you have to move another type of currency. So if the regulations come in and make it a legitimate thing that you can actually do business with, you'll see the banking system really dive into the transactional side of it. Non-anonymous, transactional, verified. So we're in a digital world.
He says everything works digitally. In a digital world, towards Bitcoin, towards digital currencies, towards digital products, isn't far off. It shows openness. And so on, it's not that far off anymore. And here, it's already showing a bit of openness. And the crazy thing is that he's basically saying that we have to open up here, because that's what the customers want. Because, of course, this is the technological advancement we're talking about. That means you can't ignore Bitcoin. He gets that too, and just take that in. I'm heading up here now. Getting the papayas. Do you see that here? I already have a stick here. Now I'm going to grab the papayas. Let's freaking go. But now comes what I mentioned earlier, the important part. Check out what he has to say next.
The other thing we were discussing was the possibility that Bitcoin and some of these cryptocurrencies could actually pose a threat to the US dollar. Scott talked about needing the US dollar to be really strong. Is it a threat?
I think there's a whole bunch of dynamics around all the trade and all the consumption of the US consumer and stuff. We need a strong US dollar. US dollar for the reserve currency. That's good for our country. But what I'm saying is, if you're out here on the street selling in the evening, when you can pay with Visa, MasterCard, debit card, Apple Pay, etc. You can pay, then it's just another form of payment in an independent money transfer. And I think if it becomes regularly okay, which it wasn't before, regularly becomes okay, which it wasn't before. And that's one of the problems. Then the bank will have to deal with that. We already have hundreds of patents on the blockchain.
We already have a significant number of patents on the blockchain. We definitely know how to get on the ferry. It's absolutely coming. Still leaves a question mark behind whether it's okay for investing and so on. But that's also what I've often said. Bitcoin is the optimal settlement network here, where you can easily move money back and forth internally within banks at very low costs with final settlement. And that's basically the big Bitcoin catalyst that could still come into play here. And what can happen in the next step. That Bitcoin is, of course, also offered as an investment by banks. But first of all, as a transaction layer, this is already super intense. He didn't quite answer the question at the beginning whether Bitcoin is a threat to the dollar. He says we need a strong dollar, but he didn't say exactly here whether crypto or Bitcoin is a threat here, as I interpret it here, but that's just my interpretation. He doesn't see it as a threat, but rather as a parallel system. That means Bitcoin, the US dollar, it can all run in parallel. I say the bank can also strengthen this, so that the bank has easier transactions here. He also said before, we basically have to adopt this. We have no other choice. And it's crazy that it's happening here too. The second largest bank in the world gets it. And seriously, JP Morgan will get it too. Largest bank in world. Jamie Dimon will get it too. They already have certain things going on with Bitcoin. That's going to expand even more. And when the regulations are clearer here, then more and more banks will basically get into Bitcoin. And just imagine what kind of signal this sends. Then suddenly the headline comes. Bank of America is now settling its international transactions or its internal bank settlements in Bitcoin or in the Lightning Network or whatever. That's obviously hard to top in terms of impact. And like I said, this is the next big catalyst. Michael Saylor said that over a year ago. And now we're seeing this play out. And Donald Trump could be a really crucial factor here, because he could really be the one, with his crypto task force, also with the crypto team that's around Donald Trump, who sets the regulations to manifest this massive catalyst into the world. And now it even goes further. Now there was an interview with Ray Dalio that is truly mind-blowing. I was really fascinated and speechless when I saw that. The way Ray Dalio talks about Bitcoin, he doesn't say to go all in on Bitcoin, etc. But you really have to check this out. This is basically a completely conservative investor who, let's say, has made a name for himself in the hedge fund business over the years. He's a billionaire who has billions in assets under management. And someone like that has to be a bit conservative, of course. I get that you can't say he's going all in on Bitcoin right now, but at least we have these small allocations here. That hedge fund managers are now making small allocations in Bitcoin. And here we have Ray Dalio in the mix.
Look at what he has to say about Bitcoin. For quite a while now, I don't know how big a portion of your little, like 1% kind of little.
Yeah, something like that.
You've done really well with it. What do you think is going to happen now?
So he's definitely not confirming a 100% allocation here. He starts off with a 1% allocation, a very, very small allocation. But now the question is, what does he think about how Bitcoin is going to develop here?
Here, evolve. Alternative money. Do you have an alternative currency? Not much. By the way, I won't get into talking about myself, but I think an investor, if you look, you will, that listens closely. If you have 10, 12, or 15% of your money, it's because it has a negative correlation.
That's gold, but...
Or we call it anti-money.
Okay, but would you put 10% in Bitcoin today at $100,000 for $1,000 Bitcoin?
No. And again, what I do is a different matter. But for me personally, Bitcoin is not a central bank reserve. It's not being bought by alternatives.
It could happen with the strategic Bitcoin reserve.
But it's just unlikely because it's so easy to control and track. But I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just saying, think about the value of debt and money. Think about the value of debt and money. If debt is money, because throughout history, there's always been the interest rate. The temptation is, and is it enough to deal with that Supply-demand problem.
And that's a really interesting answer. He doesn't answer directly. Instead, he asks a counter question. He asks, what's your alternative money? Do you have an alternative form of money or something like that? And here in the end, it's also indirect. The question is, do you have a plan here? Because Ray Dalio is of course a big critic of money. He says the dollar will fail just like any major world currency. It will fail as it's a debt-based money system. And Ray Dalio is aware that debt-based money systems always have an expiration date. In the end, he's talking here. He also says about money, of course, that Bitcoin is an alternative asset, just like money, because it obviously doesn't have a central bank, because it's independent of the central bank, because it's not a debt-based money system. So Bitcoin is actually money here. That's the actual form of money, at least according to Ray Dalio, that you simply don't have a debt obligation here, but that you have something hard like money. He also says here money has a negative correlation. That's why it makes sense to include money in the portfolio. Then the reporter interrupts and says, hey, but Bitcoin also has a negative correlation, and both are true. And that's also what's so important for big investors. I've said that over and over again, that you basically want to have assets here that are not correlated. That means, for example, when the stock market goes up, then maybe Bitcoin goes down, and when Bitcoin goes up, maybe the stock market goes down or something like that. That means you have an inverse correlation here. And that's obviously good for a portfolio when you're building a broadly diversified portfolio or something like that, like a hedge fund manager. And then it's especially important to get out of the system here. That's basically the main message you can take away from this. From Ray Dalio, that you have money that's not in the system. Money that isn't based on debt. Money that doesn't have a central bank behind it, but that you have assets here that are basically outside of the system. He was also asked about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He didn't really answer that very specifically. He said, yes, you can use it, but you don't have to use it, and so on. He basically gave a more open-ended answer. He said, hey, think about it. What's your alternative? Money. Bitcoin could be an option here. Money could be an option here. But he didn't say, hey, go buy all the Bitcoin you can. Instead, he's just posing the question here. He basically wants to encourage you to do so, to come up with the right answers yourself. That's definitely a very good, let's say, the approach that Ray Dalio has here. He doesn't directly say, hey, go buy Bitcoin, buy all the money now, or something like that, but he says exactly, think about it, what dependencies do you have in the debt-based money system, and what dependencies might you have with Bitcoin here? And then you might realize for yourself, hey, with Bitcoin, I have no dependencies at all. Neither from Christine Lagarde nor from Jerome Powell, or whatever, you know. And he also says here, think about what the value of money and debt really is. That means there's really a difference here between owning debt or owning money. So that means money might actually be money might actually be Bitcoin, because in the end, there are no debts behind it, and everything else is credit. There's also the very famous saying, I think it was from some central bank or something, that once said, money is money and everything else is credit. You could definitely apply that to Bitcoin as well. Bitcoin is money and everything else is credit. And that's basically the big warning from Ray Dalio that he always gives. Be careful with all that credit money, because credit money has the problem that the credit money system keeps inflating. Then the interest rates are artificially manipulated. He also says here, think about the interest. The supply and demand mechanisms in the market are being massively manipulated here. As soon as the interest rate is manipulated here. He didn't really say it that clearly, he just said, think about it. And that's basically just what you need to take away from this. Think about the relationship between money and debt. And above all, take some time to think about it. What's up with all this interest stuff? Can that really work when the interest rate is artificially manipulated? Aren't the market signals being massively influenced here? That in the end, you create wrong incentives, like for example, consuming too much. That's also something he touches on here. So indirectly, it's like saying, okay, now we're just throwing money around like crazy because the interest rate is so low and it's not really determined by the market, but rather set artificially by the central bank. And that's ultimately very, very problematic to see. So we have Ray Dalio here, who is really, let's say, betting on Bitcoin. Or what does massive mean, but at least 1%, 2%. That's already a massive allocation for me, because you have to picture it. He doesn't just have a few euros here, he's got billions on the line. And then we have, of course, Bank of America, which is also super bullish. And if you're super bullish too, then I'll drop a link for you down below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code Bitcoin. See you then. Peace out.